Hi, y'all. Andrew Mack here. This is Loblolly Press in Conversation. Today's episode is a special one we're releasing in honor of Juneteenth. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, it couldn't be enforced in areas still under Confederate control. So in Texas, the westernmost Confederate state, enslaved people remained in bondage for more than 2 years after the proclamation. Freedom finally arrived on June 19, 1865, when roughly 2,000 Union troops landed in Galveston Bay and announced that all enslaved people in the state were free by executive decree. This day became known as Juneteenth, named by the newly freed people of Texas. It's a day of memory, celebration, mourning, and radical hope. I can't think of a more powerful guest to help us hold all of those things at once than today's guest, Glenis Redmond. Glenis Redmond is a poet who, in her own words, has been followed by poetry all the days of her life. She's the inaugural poet laureate of Greenville, South Carolina, and a 2025 recipient of the Order of the Palmetto, which is the state's highest civilian honor. She's also the Baldwin Fellow, a 2023 Poet Laureate Fellow with the Academy of American Poets, and a citizen diplomat recognized by the Jonathan Green Maritime Cultural Center. Her poetry has appeared in Orion Magazine, the New York Times, Callaloo, American Poets, and North Carolina Literary Review. Her 2022 collection, The Listening Skin, was shortlisted for both the PEN Open Book Award and the Julie Salk Award. She's the author of 7 books, some of which include Over Yonder, A Poet's Exploration of South Carolina State Parks Part 2, coming out in July of this year, and The Song of Everything, A Poet's Exploration of South Carolina State Parks Part 1, which came out last year, both of which are from Good Printed Things, an amazing publisher based in Greenville, South Carolina. Today we talk about how place shapes her writing, how chronic illness has impacted her life, and why being a poet is often like being a historian, an archivist, tasked with telling the stories that power tries to bury. We reflect on the spiritual and political dimensions of the land, how trees and rivers carry memory, and how for Black poets, writing about nature always carries complexity. One last thing, I did want to mention that this episode includes discussions of racism, systemic oppression, and historical violence. Please listen with care. All right, let's get into it.
Well, I'm a heady person, so I'm thinking about a lot of things, and I try to get out of my head and be in my heart a lot. But I'm wrestling with health challenges. Um, you know, I'm in what we call standard remission, but multiple myeloma and anybody who's had blood cancer knows that remission does not mean it's gone. It means that the numbers are down, like I always have it. So like living close to my breastbone, my heart is the idea of not being here. And I don't say that in a way of like, oh, I'm, in a dramatic way. And then, people say, well, we're all going to die. But there's just this kind of like, I'm really wrestling with like trying to enjoy and be present as much as possible in and be in a world that seems to be for me on fire. So it's just that's what's on my mind. Like learning how to rest when number one, I'm a person who's not at rest. I'm just that doesn't come easily for me. I'm a type A person, but also trying to find moments of joy. And so gardening, grandkids, and writing are places where I go. So that's kind of what's on my mind a lot. And you'll hear about it when I talk about my latest book. I'm really my grandmother's on my mind a lot, and she was 109 when she passed, and I don't know, she just seems to be reaching out to me saying, don't forget me. And she's all over this book. And I did not set out to write about her. So I wonder if she's on my mind because I'm a grandmother and grandparenting right now is so important. So that's a little bit of what is in my universe right now, wrestling, but also to release. That's where I am.
When you talk about rest and your writing practice being a thing that brings you joy, what is kind of how do you enter writing if those like heady things are on your mind?
Well, it's so interesting because I do have a writing practice, and I now have this last 5 years have been interesting because I'm more project based than I've ever been. I have projects, like I have at least 10 books that I'm writing, and that is not a flex. That is like really a part of my character flaw. Uh, I just feel compelled and I have these things. So I don't work on all 10 of them at a time, but I at least make room for them, like list them out, storyboard them, and then give maybe two and a half of those my whole. So and my process is just to write, um, try to write 4 to 5 hours a day. But when I'm touring and doing stuff like, it's just not possible. But when I'm home, I write. I write longhand in my journal. I try to sink as deep as I possibly can. And so the state park books that I've been doing were almost an aside from the projects that I was working on, but they were a way to actually cope with illness and um, being a multi-generational household and a caretaker, all of those things. So it's like I'm working in many worlds at once. But when I'm in that world, when I'm in that project, I'm there, only in that place, in that book, in whatever that imagination, wherever I am. Like I'm getting ready to hop over to, I'm writing a novel in verse of Peg Leg Bates, the one-legged tap dancer from Fountain in South Carolina. So that's the, I've been working on that for 2.5 years, but really in mind and imagination, 10 years. So it's an interesting thing. So process looks like getting up and saying, oh, what did you dream about that last night? And then kind of enter into a dream space, which I find dream space and writing space very similar. So I'm writing to have a conversation, writing to see what's there and to uncover where I need to go. So it's a really, like I say, 4 or 5 hours, but then to me, writing's every day, all the time. And that's a weird thing to say because, I mean, while I'm cooking, I'm writing poems. While I'm obsessing on documentaries on Netflix about mountain climbing, which I don't do. It's just these weird quirks I have, but I'm actually working something out in my writing when I'm doing those things. So I'm never not preoccupied with creating, except when I'm with my grandchildren and I'm in their place of joy. And then I'm just there. I'm like, I'm not inhabiting the space of a writer. I'm inhabiting the space of a gaga or just being free. So it's really hard for me to step out of the writing process is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because there's this kind of your state park books essentially are kind of that traveling with your grandson Julian through these different parks.
Right.
And it sounds like the poetry came later. The experience came first. And I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit. Those two roles that you play, like I am Gaga and I do these experiences and I want Julian to experience being in these parks.
Yeah.
And then coming later, you are a writer. And how do you interpret it then?
Yeah, we went to the state parks like I just had a stem cell transplant. I was clinging on to life. Like stem cell was great, but they, practically kill you to keep you alive. And so I was literally struggling. He has his own challenges, mood disorder or spectrum sort of things. And he was flailing, I was flailing. We were both inundated by screens. And I just really wanted to get us out of the house, and so we just started going to these parks. And as we were at the parks, we just discovered each other and in nature, and he became the kid I was in the 70s, like, engaging with rocks and the lake and the water and and then I just watching him and just being there together. So it did not start out as a project at all. I then started posting pictures of us at different parks, and saying, "Oh, I'm writing a poem at this park," each park I go to kind of remember our experience. And then Lib Ramos of Good Printed Things saw that on Instagram and called me on it and said, "If you're actually going to do that, let's do it." And I said, "Oh, wow. I didn't know if I, you know, meant it, but I guess I do. I do. It's a good way to document." And uh, I'm dealing with a lot of stuff with memory, like losing memory because of chemotherapy, losing memory because of the stem cell transplant, all of the stuff. And people don't really realize how much I lost, and language acquisition I lost as well, which is hard for someone who speaks for a living. So that was a way, the visual, taking the picture and then writing just a few things down was a way for me to hold on to those experiences. So yeah, the project and the book and even the poems came very much later. We were just out there. We were just hanging out there, and beautiful.
I think a lot of artists would say that it's kind of first about the experiencing. I think the way that I've thought about it, maybe other poets have thought about it too, is the idea of there are times when I'm gathering and there are times when I'm writing, and those are two different things. And like you said, I do feel when I'm cooking and those things, I'm always a writer.
Yeah.
There are times when I feel very distant from it too, though, and I feel like I'm just experiencing the world around.
Which
I
is
want
a
to,
good thing to do, right?
yeah,
Just experience the world and not be unpacking it for a poem or working through
yes.
it.
I spent most of my 20s leading wilderness trips for teenagers in New Hampshire, Michigan, Maine, Vermont, and Nova Scotia.
Wow.
And I hardly ever thought about writing. I was just focused on caretaking because I had teenagers that I was in charge of.
Of
Um,
course.
but later, of course, the poems came.
Yeah. Beautiful.
You wrote an incredible article in 2012 for Orion magazine called "What Hangs on Trees."
Wow.
Um, I've actually been looking at your work holistically. I have a few of your books, and
Yeah.
um, you have always had this interest in nature, and yet your relationship with nature you talk about has been plagued by a sense of like haunting that you weren't sure
Yeah.
where it came from, at least initially. And it seems like by writing, you are trying to come to some understanding when you see a tree, how it makes you feel. Um, the article starts, "I'm simultaneously enchanted and then haunted by trees."
Yeah.
And you have a poem, "Say Carolina," from my Palmetto State after Rita Dove. That poem as well deals specifically what it means to be a South Carolinian with a connection to the land. And you reference Lucille Clifton as well.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could just speak to us a little bit about how your relationship with place has evolved over time in your writing, um,
Mhm.
and just give us a sense of like where you're headed next.
It's quite interesting to be a nature person because, like I was in Girl Scouts. I was, an outdoor girl. I was what we call a tomboy, much to my mother's chagrin. Um, and so I always was enchanted by trees and birds and just knew the names of them without going to the library. I don't know where that knowledge came from. My mother's a country woman, but she doesn't know the names of things. Like she'll just say that yellow plant or that blah, blah. Um, but it wasn't until I was at Warren Wilson and Gabrielle uh, Cavacaresi, my first year, she was my advisor, and she asked me to write a pastoral poem. And for the life of me, I could not write a poem. I could not do it. And I did not at that time. And this was around 2008. And I was blocked. I was trying to, because I was thinking pastoral, just the bucolic nature. You love nature, Glenis. Just go ahead and write this poem. Just riff on the trees and the flowers and the birds. Like, do that. And there was something in me that I would get there, and it was just until this moment of, I was in a group of folks at Warren Wilson, they start talking about fears. What are your fears? And everybody's like spiders and ghosts and, ants and, all that kind of stuff. And I said, trees. And everybody just looked at me and, they're like, how could you be afraid of trees? And it was just, to me, like, how could you not know the history of trees to African Americans, to Black folks? And that was the key that unlocked everything. This is why it's in my throat this way, where it won't come out the way. I can't tell just one side. I've got to tell Emily Dickinson always says, tell the truth, but tell it slant, which is beautiful and poetic. And I love the way her brain works. But there's something about the African American story that has not been told in whole. It's been told in parts. And when I got in touch with that wholeness, then I could start telling the story of my ancestors, of my enslaved family. Like, these are family members, what it was like on the land to be part of the land and used as a tool of the land. And in some ways, I reference a lot in my work how the land was treated better than our people. And so that turn in around 2008, like really seeing that, or more, it started in 2008 with that question of writing the poem. And then around 2011 and 2012, I kind of got it. The people from my past started singing to me through cotton fields, through what was done on the land, what they did on the land. And of course, there is this separation. And so my gaze became just more informed. I was just really looking everywhere but where I needed to be. And that was right to my parents and my grandparents.
As someone who lives, I live in North Carolina now, but I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina. I travel to Greenville quite often, but to the coast as well. The project that I'm working on right now is inspired by my time in the Ace Basin National Wildlife Refuge, which is the site of a historic plantation called Grove Plantation.
Okay.
And you would not believe, I'm sure you actually would believe, you would not be surprised at how difficult it is to find the legacy of enslaved folks who lived and worked there. And part of the project I'm working on is trying to give voice to those folks.
Yeah.
And it is possible to find. I have discovered it in archives, but it is very challenging. What I so much admire about your work and where I see you living in the lineage of bell hooks, Lucille Clifton, is that authenticity of telling the story about the land that is true to us. When we are in South Carolina and we're driving by soy fields that used to be cotton fields, I drive through aware, and I almost have a reverence for that space. But we all should. And yet our history is so whitewashed that folks see it as just, like you said, bucolic and beautiful. And that's just not the case.
It's true. It's true. I call it hidden in plain sight. Like, just like you said, it's there in the archives. You got to find it and you got to read between the lines to find us. But we're there. The same way when you're driving down a road, like, the history's there. It's been objectified to the point of, like, this southern view that doesn't include the folks who cultivated the land and built the plantations. But it's there. It's so palpable to me. Like, and I felt it as a kid. Like, I felt it as a 12-year-old. First time I saw a plantation when we moved back as an Air Force kid, and people were talking about how beautiful these places were. And I was always haunted by plantations because, as poets, I think we are sensitive. And if you have another sensitivity on top of that, you're aware of what went on before. I don't know how you're not informed by the land. I just don't understand it. I mean, I just don't understand. So I think there's plenty of work. So I love hearing about your project. There's plenty of work for all of us to do, because in a time where people are so busy trying to get rid of history, and we haven't even really excavated where we need to go. Like there's so many places you were like, where have you ended up? Now I'm plunging deeper. And I had early people telling me on when I was like, oh, well, you've done the ancestral thing. You need to move on. Are you have no clue. I am learning, the more I learn to go deeper in myself, I can go deeper, collect, with the past. And so it's a mandate. And I think Lucille Clifton, so interesting you brought Lucille Clifton. My name does not deserve to be in the breath of Lucille Clifton, but Lucille Clifton wrote a memoir, and that memoir was so uncanny in the way how she wrote it. It was like a journey travel log from her original African ancestor who they knew, who walked from wherever she was in the South to all the way to where they were in, I don't know, if it was Buffalo to Maryland, then to Buffalo. But that was the first time I seen anything tell our story in that way. And I just, it's a very slim, I think it's called Generations. I think it's just called Generations, a memoir. But it's so slim, but it's doing all this epistolary work. It's doing this travel work. It's just, and that was the first time I just said, aha, I've got a way to move in the world. And Lucille Clifton has been that blueprint for me in so many ways. And I don't write anything like Lucille Clifton, but I feel very akin to her spiritually.
I think that's what I was picking up on. And what you just said made me think of Jacki Shelton Green, who also mentions, and I don't want to misquote her, but I did go see her read, and she mentioned being a bit of a poet historian or a poet archivist. And I do think that that's what a lot of us are, is that we are interested in the past, and not just interested in it, but telling real, authentic stories about the past, even if fictionalized, to maybe speak to the present or the future.
Yeah, and I wonder sometimes if what is fictional, like I tend to use the word mystical for my work. It's like I step in where the archives and where history has not preserved. You can put ear and heart to ground and they will tell you. Like, so I was having all these uncanny experiences while I was touring the country and the world. And I was having all of these weird experiences and I just did not know. And I was journaling nonstop automatically. And when I went to Bristol, it almost broke me. Bristol in England. And I did a reading at the church. I don't know if it was St. George's. I can't remember. And a guy came up to me and said, well, we didn't have the slave trade here. And then, a guy after him said, no, we were the architects. Basically we were the architects. It took me a while, Andrew, to figure out what was going on with me. But I realized I was having all these uncanny experiences and they were all at port cities. Mm-hmm. And they were all where the enslaved had been brought into whatever country I was in. And it took me a while. I found myself slow. It took me years to figure out, like, why am I having these reactions? What is speaking to me? And so it's just like, yeah, like to be open to the ethers, to be open to the stories that have gone before us, I think is the job and the role of the poet. And that's what makes us, not everybody wants to do that in poetry, but a lot of us do. And it makes us uncanny people because we are hearkening. We're listening to something that no one else is listening to. And it is sensitive. It is quiet, but it is the most real thing. It's the minutia. We feel it and we can also hear it in a way. And that's what we're transcribing, so that's to me, that was my big aha moment of like, oh my God, and that's my next full length collection will be called Port Cities, and talking about this poetic cartographer of what I consider myself, like putting, quilting is a big part of what I do, but also mapping out like that. Yeah.
You actually talk about in one of your poems, quilting being a code, quilting being a code about Denmark Vesey and the slave revolution he attempted to create. I would like to read one of your poems to you. Would that be okay?
No, I love it.
It's called Field Cotton, and it is from Praise Songs for Dave the Potter, Art and Poetry for David Drake, which is an incredible project that folks should have their hands on, where you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I understand it, you write poems or have poems here that are related directly to this art series by Jonathan Green.
That's correct. Sir
Okay.
Dave.
Sir
Yeah,
Dave.
his art series, Sir Dave, about David Drake. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is field cotton.
Hmm.
We stand not on the edge, but in the middle of the field in between this white blaze that God made. Our minds not fixed on the North Star, but grounded to the weight in our bones as we pick, prick, and bleed. Drag from what seems like Genesis to Revelation. We are bred and wed to this cotton spur hold. We sing hymns like Steal Away, but we know these songs be the only things we'll ever know of wings. How can something so comely turn so ugly? When greed wraps its hands around the land, cotton becomes a field of lies, acting like the truth. This cotton crop got too many mouths, works us from can't see to can't see, with 2 cotton sacks strapped across our backs. We forget how we once dreamed to be turned up like sunflowers in praise, or how we once prayed to be woven to a greater whole, linked by the right hand of fellowship singing, "How do you do, sir? How do you do, sir?" We know nothing about freedom in this heat. We got a blind eye and a deaf ear to everything, except to what's at hand. Cotton running in straight rows, the only train we was ever meant to ride.
Mm. Thank you for reading that.
It hits me hard. I'm a sensitive person like you, and I wanted to ask you about the legacy of generational trauma in that way. I know you mentioned chronic illness, discovering you had fibromyalgia, and then your doctor saying a component of that could be psychological. Um, could you share more about kind of your experience with chronic illness and how it's impacted you as a writer and as a poet?
I was born sickly. I didn't, and I have always been a disabled person. I have in Listening Skin, I have a poem called I Stay Sick, but I never presented. I always presented as able-bodied, but I diagnosed with fibromyalgia when in my early 30s, probably at 30, right after I had my daughters. So I've never not walked in the world without illness. Like I'm just one of these people, and all the illnesses I have are invisible. So people would say, "Well, you look great, you look fine, even with cancer." It wasn't until I got the high dose chemo and all my hair fell out, then people were like, "Oh, you know, it's real." It's always been real. You brought up generational. I do think this is generational. Like I come from a family who have that battles with a lot of illness, blood disorders and those sorts of things. And being an Air Force kids, even though I saw the Air Force as a way for my father to start our migration north in the 50s to leave here, it all, I think it was jumping out of the frying pan into the fire because, we were still impoverished. I was a Head Start kid. We lived on these dilapidated houses that were condemned. So this illness thing is a thread that runs from generation to generation. And that has to do with economics. It has to do with race. It has to do with systemic, oppression. And so, the more I see it, the more I get in touch with it, the more I can become aware of what I need to do for myself personally. But outside of poetry, I become a medical advocate. It's like I have to, I have a lot of resources as far as like, I know if I don't have the money, I know how to figure out how to get the money, like a grant or how to like advocate for myself, even when I'm really sick, which no one should have to do. But now I feel like I have to raise my voice. So there's fighting even in the illness. Like there's, that gospel, I'm going to stay on the battlefield until I die. That's how I feel that's the mandate. It's like I'm going to treat everybody right. I'm going to stay on the battlefield until I die. And that's how I feel about my life right now. How dare I have to fight even more? But what else are you going to do with your time? This is what I'm going to do with it. But it's a fighting life. It's a loving life and it's a fighting life. And even in South Carolina, which I love, because I have a lot of cohorts, it's like, how can you stay in the South? Get out South. Like, oh, my ancestors came through here. I came through the inverted Ellis Island, Port of Charleston. They came through here. This is our state. I love South Carolina for good and bad. It's so weighted, but it's also so beautiful in ways that I cannot name. I know this place. I navigate it. But at the same time, I've taken many hits. I don't know if, these hits were due to, I do know that the hits were due to how I incarnated, this lifetime, and so what am I going to do with it? I'm going to write my way out as much as I can,
I really appreciate how you're describing kind of the systemic oppression that happens over time, not just what lives on in our brain and in our genetics through trauma, but also just the systems that continue to create the place for
That's
chronic
right.
illness. I grew up in poverty. I also experienced chronic illness. There's really a direct thread through.
Exactly.
Exactly. And I'm lucky enough now, and it sounds like you're able to receive care too, but it gives us, when we grow up in these places where we are living that fighting life, um, I think people start to see it as like, well, that's why they're community builders, because they can raise the funds and they can do the things. Or that's why they're activists. Um, I often feel frustrated that like, because we had to do it, we became good at it, and now people see it as our gift.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
And it's like not always the gift I want to be offering to everyone.
It's a
it-
ed, right? I mean, you understand, you come from poverty, that kind of thing. Poverty is like a layered thing. Like, how do you get that out of your bones? Like, I still have it in me. Like, I have this law of scarcity because of where I come from at times and how I view it. And not to mention the trauma that comes along with poverty. Like, there's sometimes I guess I feel like I romanticize it, like, oh, we had everything. My mother made do. She did make do, but there was a lot of things that were passed down or things that would be neglect because we didn't have the funds to go to the doctor, or just the viewpoint in the Black community of like healing in there's not one. Like, you get sick, you'll be all right. You'll be good. Put some, where do you think all those folk remedies came from? They didn't have access to doctors.
Mhm.
But then there's the psychological. I wasn't until I took that ACE quiz, the adverse childhood. My daughter sent it to me. She said, Mom, you might want to take this. And I made a 10. I took a 10. I was like, oh. And then that research does. It's like children who've had this amount of trauma, it is directly linked to health conditions. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So did I escape? Even though people they look to me and say, oh, she's here, or she's on this platform. I don't know if I'm out. It's a cost.
And it's always, I will say, in our current political climate, it's always a risk.
Yes.
Generational wealth, the reason that it works is because it builds over time and creates a net of safety around the folks that it benefits.
Right.
And as someone who I jokingly always say, like, I'm here to build generational wealth, like I'm here to start that process.
Right.
It's always a little bit at risk though, because
Yeah.
we don't have that thing to fall back on in the end.
You had nothing to build on.
No, I luckily did. I had great grandparents who were able to make a good living, and they were able to take my brother and I in at a certain point in our life, and that has it enabled me to get a college education. And so all of those things, those are the kind of privileges I was afforded, and I'm grateful for those things. And that was my starting point. For folks who don't have that starting point, it becomes a lot more difficult, and actually one could say maybe impossible. Yeah,
That's right. And because for the many resilient people like us that they point to as examples, that there are so many people who were broken and cannot. And I think that's why I show up as a teaching artist and a poet the way I do, and the way I write the way I do. Like, nothing wrong with experimental and academic poets, but I really want to write in a voice that speaks, number one, healing to that child who would have been me, 5-year-old sitting in the seat, or to my grandmother who had a 3rd grade education. So that's why I'm bent on speaking and showing up the way I do, because I want to build roads of access for folks like me. And that is across the board. Like, I would go to schools, for 30 years, and I would always have what I call the others. They would be in line waiting to just talk to me because they saw something. I would have every kid that you would think that who would be an other in that line saying, here's someone who sees me. Here's someone. And I joke, I used to always have the anime kids who they found me. They would just find me. Like, they were like, there's something, can I show you my drawings? Can they talk to me? And then now I've got a anime grandson. Like, it's just all full circle living of like, if you've ever been othered and you're sensitive by that, you're sensitized by the othering, it is empathy.
Yeah.
And it is not a soft skill. It is one of the most powerful skills that you can exercise.
Hey there, we're taking a quick break. I wanted to hop on to let you know that if you are enjoying the conversation, we would love to hear from you. You can follow us on social media, @loblolly_press, or you can actually review this podcast on the app that you're listening to. We also have some news. We have a book coming out in September. It's our next release, and it is a collection of fiction from Emma Ensley, who's an Asheville writer, and the book is called The Computer Room. It's already up for pre-order on our website, so we hope you'll take a look. We also have a partnership project in collaboration with Good Printed Things that's coming in October. We'll have more details on that soon, but that is called The Field Guide to North American Trees from Alabama poet Garrett Ashley. Okay, thank you for your time. Let's get back into the conversation. So you bring up empathy, and I think that that's part of what I wanted to ask you about was when you're in that space of, well, first of all, I felt that way when I met you as well. I was in that line of people that wanted to talk to you at the end, so as you remember. But I've always felt that way about your work, and I think it comes through in the way you write. It's also why I would say, like, you're an incredible written poet and you're an incredible spoken poet, and you seem to embody both of those. Which one do you feel is like more impactful for you, or feels like good to share, or is it kind of both equally?
Well, don't know. I mean, I kind of moved through the world as a 6-year-old as a voracious reader. So I love words. I love print. When I first started in poetry, I was that geek at every poetry reading. I didn't care if it was at a university, at a library. I mean, I just love words. Like, so just wash over me. I did see a lack of diversity, in the 90s in those spaces. So that's why I created the first poetry slam in Greenville. And it became one of the most diverse places. Now, don't create a slam, though, because then you'll be known as a slam poet for the rest of your life, which I just love the venue because it was like a workshop. It was a state. I am a Southern Black with African descent woman. I am a griot. And I don't consider myself a spoken word artist, but I definitely am a storyteller and love language, the orality. I grew up in the Black church. Come on, like these ministers were singing poems, and I was there. I mean, when I was a traditional person, like in church, I'm no longer that. My spirituality is outside of that, but I was in there like for all of the rhythms, the theater, all of that. How could I not embody all of that in me? And so sometimes people would hear me and they're like, "Oh, you're a hip hop poet, you're a spoken word artist, you're this." I'm like, I'm a poet who loves the page and the stage. But my whole thing is that I'm trying to breathe life into a poem. And I know when I was in the Omaha Nation in Nebraska, I petitioned one of the elders there, and she said, "There's no word for poet in our culture, but I will tell you when I hear you talk, as a woman who flies with words." And I love that. She said it in her tongue. I love that. But I love all those things that defy. But when I work with my students, I'm like, I don't care if you decide to be what we call a page poet or a stage poet. I just think you should know both worlds and not be above or below either one. I tend to be somewhere in the middle. I want my foot in each, but I think it's more, if I had to answer your question, I would err more towards the stage, even though I want something firm on the page. Then my work has just started. Then I want to figure out, how can I bring that piece? How can I bring it into life? And I don't memorize everything. I don't really necessarily perform, but I am really trying to embody a poem. But I also want to interact with the audience. Like, I want all of these things to be true. And that's just who I am as a person, though. Like, I think that's how I incarnated into the world, is that I have always been high contacts and very dramatic, like drove my mother crazy.
You mentioned Julian, your grandson, is neurodivergent. And for those of us who are that way, a lot of us feel like nature is the place we can go to restore, because I can be in the loudest forest and it is so quiet to me. But if I'm next to a road, I'm completely discombobulated.
Right.
So what was your experience with Julian when you guys were going to the national park? Did he find it soothing? Or I know there's one of your new poems in Over Yonder, you talk about him wanting his iPad out in there, and
Yeah.
you said, no, this is family time.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, so yeah, he's very, he's neurodivergent, and he does have like sounds. He has a lot of sensory issues. But going out into nature, yeah, he does like want. Now he's 10. He wants the iPad and stuff to go along. And sometimes I'll cave and say, well, you can have it in the car, but when we get there, um, but I will say this: I never told him we're going to the park because you need it, or you're going through like meltdowns, like, or whatever. But one day he turned to me, he said, I think it's time for us to go to the park. I'm having a hard time. And I was like, oh, God, this kid, he's got me. He understands that there's something about nature, and he is a different child in nature. And I'm not saying those things go away. I think he can focus and hyperfixate on nature. And I do have, it's almost like, I know you are, like, you're neurodivergent. We have that like superpower or pattern recognition. But you said about how I have a poem in the next book coming out called Country Quiet or something like that. The country is not, it's anything but quiet. It's like one of the, you're like, I'm going to countryside. No, if you get in tune with nature out there, like, it's speaking on so many levels that it's like, but you know what? It's a different kind of noise. It is not the noise of the traffic. It is not the noise of man-made things. It is a noise that it can be irritating if you don't want to be there. But if you're meditating, that becomes part of the medicine. And I can, even with, I mean, I know the cicadas were really loud, but there's a musicality and a lyricism that happens in nature that if you don't take time for it, it can be seen as an annoyance instead of the music that it is. And that's how far I think we are disconnected as humans. And as much as I'm saying that to Julian about the device, I'm saying that to myself, because I have my own addiction with devices on typing and doing. And so I've been trying to really cut myself off and go, what do you really think? And I went to a retreat. I went to a 9-day retreat, and that was beautiful. Just to, really come back to, what are you afraid of? And what you're afraid of is, and what I'm afraid of is, I have more depths to plummet. And nature is the only place that allows me that stillness to really meditate and get there. And there's a lot there.
I'm so glad that you've gotten to that point, like or maybe it's always been that way, but that you've really explored it to this degree, because there's one of the poems that stands out to me in the Song of Everything is The Gauntlet. And I won't read it. It's like very difficult to read out loud.
Yeah.
But I will just share for listeners that it's essentially about riding to the state park and passing Confederate flags, if I'm correct, right?
Right, that's correct.
Which is an experience all of us in the South, and actually I will say I've been in the North too.
Yes,
we see it, yeah, it's all there. And the poem ends though, where you say, I take my grandson to state parks to know these green spaces are his places as a Black boy. I want him to know he belongs here. And for you to say, I get to the point where nature is kind of that, I feel connected enough and it's at peace. You want Julian also to feel safe in those places so that he can access that same thing. And that's the goal. And I almost see that kind of as part of the thesis statement for these two books that you've put together is, number one, The Song of Everything, and then number two, Over Yonder.
Right. Well, you're heading to it. Like, we talked about generational trauma and, health conditions and stuff. So can there be generational resilience, and can there be generational joy? The wealth can be money, which I am not opposed to. Bring it on. Bring it. But also the wealth can be this key to accessing spaces that were not meant for you. And I want to lead with a boldness as a gaga, as a grandmother for him. And it might be lost on him now. I think he has a clue. I mean, I think he has a key, but I'm just wondering, like, when he's 20 or 30, will he go, my grandmother taught me how to navigate these spaces. Yes, there are signs to keep me out, but my grandmother always did the limbo. She always figured out how to dance in the margin and widen that space. And I'm going to do it too.
You mentioned that your mom actually told you a story about going to a state park, which you later found out that
Yes.
she actually could not have gone to that state park, that her memory was not of the state park, but of a city park that was for Black people only.
Here's the thing, it was like I'm writing these poems and I had just started writing those poems. And then she says, oh, we went to Paris Mountain. I'm like, I did, and she's like, no. I said, no, Mom, you would have had to go to Pleasant Ridge. There's more of that in Over Yonder too. I tell a little bit more of the deeper story. It gets deeper. It gets deeper. But there I go. There again, here I'm wanting to have just a pastoral, bucolic experience with my grandson, state parks. But I should have known. This is America. But how do you really know when we're being institutionalized in a way that you will not, this is being erased from our memory banks, or not even educated. It's not even there. And then I turn to my mother and she's the answer. She tells me and I tell her. And then the story gets deeper. And it's not just in this area, it is systemic. It's throughout the state and it's throughout the country. It was set up this way. But you would not know that today.
No. And I'll say, like, I think that there's you were talking about kind of like, you'll forever be known as a slam poet. I feel like there's something kind of that feeling of like, you'll forever be known as like a local poet or a regional
Yeah.
poet.
Yeah.
And I'm not upset by that. Like, I would love to be known as a person who was rooted entirely in a place and that I wrote about that place from the perspective of being in it, like
Well,
you do.
I agree, and I'm nodding my head and yes on that, because as an Air Force brat and who's rooted in South Carolina and who has worked nationally and internationally, that's why I said now it's working in the reverse, working with Lib Ramos. Place is the most authentic place for me to stand and to own. And then also, once you own this, it's universal. I'm not shooting anything but to be more rooted to where I am, and let the tree grow, let the branches grow from there. And then they'll call you what, a Southern poet, or whatever they want to call it. But, that's what's going to happen. People need to categorize. But at the end of the day, we're poets and we do what we do because we have to. We are compelled to do what we do. And it doesn't matter what your fixation is. You're doing this fixation is what you came in to do. And hopefully you'll grow over time, right? That's what I'm trying to do. Over time, I'm growing as I learn. I learn, I read, but there is a learning, what Maladomas amaze, there is a knowledge that cannot be eaten with the head. So all the learning is not taking you to the growth. Of course, the craft, it gets stronger. But these moments with my mother and her saying one thing like that, and I'm going, oh my God, that opened me to a whole nother world. And then spending my time understanding where, how they were educated through Rosenwald schools. And most people don't know about Rosenwald schools, that were, Julius Rosenwald, who was the CEO of Sears Roebuck, started these schools in African-American communities. So people had somewhere to go after the 8th grade. And that's where my parents went to, Fountain Inn Colored High School. And that's on their senior trip. They went to Pleasant Ridge. It was called Negro State Park because it's the first state park solely for African Americans in the state of South Carolina. So all this we say about place or region is, to me, the most authentic expression of what we can be and do.
And we have to keep doing that work. Otherwise, as you said, that institutionalization, it goes away. We can't rely on our schools and we can't rely on our government to do that.
Right.
So
It's always been the artists. It's always been the poets to tell that truth, and we're going to continue to do it.
Would you mind reading Over Yonder for us to close out the episode?
Oh,
Or any poem you'd like to read from the new collection. Up to you.
Oh yeah, if you don't mind, I would like to read the poem from Pleasant Ridge. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Over Yonder is great. It's Over Yonder is like the first poem of the book. Like it's just my grandmother telling me, in her way. But I would love to, if you don't mind. It's kind of a downer poem, but
All good.
we're poets. It's called What to Do in Water, for Pleasant Ridge State Negro Park, 1954. Play, splash. Don't get in that water, the adults warningly sing. But the July heat bears down, so boys do what boys do. Be how boys be. Hard-headed, bent on fun. The park not quite a full park yet, not up to code, not up to standards, but it's 1954. We take what we get. And it was all we had. Separate, but hardly equal. Not so great again, but better than before. A place for us to gather, to relax, church outing, cookout, a long way to travel, a youth group from New Pleasant Grove Baptist Church in southern Greenville County. I'm sure of the splash and the romp and the one step too far, the dare, the sinkhole and whirlpool, the mad dash. Safety had come and gone, 1 foot too far, cries for help if they could swim. If Ed Grant 16, if Curtis Arnold 14, if Roosevelt Johnson 14, if there were if there was a lifeguard on duty, if they had swim classes, if they could have arced their live bodies and poised their arms into the purposeful stroke or kicked their feet into the less graceful dog paddle. If they knew how to just let go, not struggle, not fight the ripples of their own making. If they could raise their heads, not sucking down brackish water that led to bodies to become sinking stones. If they could just trust the water would hold them like God's clear palm, relinquish their beautiful black backs to the creek, loaded, eyes to the sky, they rise to the surface, drift to the shore, breathing thankful air, grateful, weary, wore out, but alive.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back on the first Monday of July with our next episode. This episode was produced, edited, and mastered by me, Andrew Mack, from my home in Asheville, North Carolina. Loblolly Press is dedicated to amplifying emerging voices from the American South, with a focus on queer, BIPOC, and rural writers. To learn more about our books, our authors, and what's coming next, head to loblollypress.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can also find us on Instagram at loblolly_press for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and a lot more. If you like this episode, please do consider leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. It really helps us keep going and supports the writers we believe in.